Зялёныя размовы. Падкаст-вандроўка па экалагічным актывізме. Мы сустракаемся з актывістамі і экспертамі ў розных краінах свету, абмяркоўваем з імі вострыя пытанні, слухаем цікавыя гісторыі, робім абстрактныя паняцці зразумелымі і даем парады тым, хто хоча ісці зялёным курсам. Пятую зялёную размову мы правядзем на ангельскай мове з Веснай Юсуп, грамадзянскай і экаактывісткай з Сербіі. На момант запісу падкасту кіраўніцай аддзела палітыкі, стратэгіі і развіцця Еўрапейскіх Зяленых.
Good day, dear friends. Today is our first podcast in English, Green Talks, Зялёные Размовы, and today we will talk with Веснай Юсуп. She is an activist from Serbia, and she is living in Belgium right now and works for European Greens. Yep. Good day, Vesna. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for the invitation.
And first question, maybe you can talk a little bit about yourself and your activism in Serbia and so on.
Yeah. Thank you very much for inviting me to this podcast. Yes, I have been part of the civil society or activist group in Serbia for a very long time. Maybe since 2003, 2004, there was different programs which supported the high schoolers to engage in different activistic spheres, and then ever since 2015, when I moved out from Serbia, I was part of different non-governmental organizations or joining different activistic causes, mainly in a sphere of gender equality, which was my specific focus of interest, but I have also worked with different environmental groups, and then in 2006 I joined the Young Greens of Serbia, and this is where my green story started.
And what inspired you to become an activist?
That's hard to pin. As I said, I think that one of the first things that became kind of obvious with these high school programs that we had was that there is kind of a parallel life that is happening out there apart from, the formal education. You go to university, you finish it, you get a job, you do your thing professionally and so on. And then by knowing more about this activistic scene, I realized how much out of the world is there that we are not getting to the formal education and as part of your daily life. But then also I think that at some moment it was not so much about only how can you make life better and kind of have it as an additional luxurious contribution, but more about things that we need to preserve or things that we need to defend or people who need immediate support and help and so on and so on.
And probably you can tell a little bit about environmental activism in Serbia. Is it important and to what they go in environmental activism in Serbia right now?
Yeah, I think that activism is always important. And if you look at the Serbian case, throughout last decades, we passed maybe through different kind of waves of activism. Beginning of 90s and mid 90s, because of the war, we had a lot of peace activism and humanitarian action. Then after 2000 and 5th October, which is kind of the day when the revolution came and the system changed, a lot of democratic actions took place, a lot of democratic education, a lot of kind of political activism based on the idea of rule of law, participation, youth participation, inclusion, and so on and so on. Today, I think that Serbia is in a big environmental activism moment. Unfortunately, as I said before, it doesn't come from, I don't think that it's coming from a perspective that, everyone are so aware and want to engage and improve environment, but it's rather coming from a very dire situation in which our water resources or our air quality, air itself, soil are attacked, and then we need to defend it. And people see it, people feel it, and then they also unionize around these issues.
And right now you live in Belgium. Probably you can compare activism in Belgium and in Serbia. Is it different? Is it the same?
Well, I mean, first of all, in Belgium you have two different realities. There's a Belgian reality, and then there is a European reality, since there is so much of a European Union center based in Brussels. So, for example, in Brussels you will very, very often going to find very big protests and marches, and very often there are very small ones. Some of them are directed towards the European institutions. So there are, for example, protests from a lot of minority groups, a lot of African countries, protest groups for Free Palestine, for example. To me, these are it's very hard to follow all of them, So like when there are so many and so different on so many different topics, it's hard to follow, it's hard to know, and it's hard to join as well. On the other hand, Belgian society, I find it very sensitive, or at least much more than some other societies. So, for example, climate marches that took place a couple of years ago, and now they're very massive. We are speaking about millions of people who protest. There's a lot of protests now, for example, happening in support of Ukraine, where these are really massive marches, and somehow people seem easy to mobilize in that sense.
And in Serbia, it's not so easy to mobilize people, do you think so? Not?
Yeah, I would say not that much, not that easy, and not on that variety of topics.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And when we talk about environmental topics, is it easy to mobilize people in Serbia or in Belgium?
Well, I mean, speaking of a Serbian example, I think that mobilization, as I said, comes rather from the fact that people are seeing with their eyes the problem now. Like one day you have a river to irrigate your vegetables, next day you don't have that river. I mean, you can really see the air from how polluted it is. I mean, Belgrade is one of the most polluted cities on the maps that have been out in previous months. And that's just not normal. We don't have that much industry, to kind of claim it. So in that sense, I think that people it's something very tangible, and then they can mobilize because they can see it with their own eyes. I would say that for some of the issues that are not that tangible, it would be very hard. For example, if you would now want to organize a protest against overuse of pesticides, or if you want to organize a protest for some biodiversity issues, something that is just not so tangible, I'm not sure that it will be massive. But one thing that maybe is good to mention, which I think it's very, very good, is that there is a lot of solidarity between the activists in Serbia at the moment. So the protests are numerous because also different groups support each other. So it's not only about my river, and my city, but it's more on a national level, and people travel great miles in order to support activists in a similar situation. And I think that's a very beautiful thing.
And can you tell a little bit more about the situation with rivers in Serbia?
Yeah, that has been a big issue in last years, where the authorities thought that micro hydropower plants are all of a sudden going to solve all our issues. It's also a big question on micro hydro. Does it constitute as renewables? Because technically hydro energy should be renewable, but then the problem was not so much into like micro hydropower plants itself, but rather in the whole process, where the government and the authorities were giving permissions to companies without environmental impact assessment before, where they would kind of give permissions for projects which are super non-rentable, where they would kind of not offer people a solution, like they take them a river, but they don't offer them any repatriation or any other kind of exchange for the problems that will occur. And then, people started rising up from blocking the investors to come, from blocking the machines, also legal actions. Like we had also a group of environmentalist lawyers who raised up for the cause. And it went quite great, but I mean, it's also hard to be happy about it because it comes from a very negative situation.
Let's talk about Greens, Green parties in Europe. Can you say that they are strong right now? And getting stronger. It's your opinion.
Yeah, I can say that they're getting stronger. Yeah, I mean the strength is relevant, of course, but I mean green parties across Europe are now entering governments more and more. We have seen this thing that was kind of in media called the green wave, where green parties really broke the records of expectations in elections since 2017 up till today. I think this is kind of political force that is here to stay and here to grow. Most of the green parties are usually running to the elections on a very well-known topics. And then the question is just, are those topics the one that elections are about? So I think that everyone knows what Green stands for, or majority of the citizens know what the Green stands for. The only question is if, this is on the political agenda, and the so-called green topics like climate, biodiversity, but then also, the welcoming society, the corruption, taxation, social justice, inclusion, gender equality. These are all topics that are more and more on citizens' minds and on a voter's choice criteria, and this is what also gives impetus to the green parties and why they're growing at the moment.
And when we say that Greens became more popular, that they're getting stronger, can we say that there are countries where they getting more stronger and countries where they don't?
No, of course, and I mean statistics can kind of give you those numbers very clearly. There is this kind of a reference that, Greens can only grow in societies which are rich and educated, which I think has a bit of more complex understanding. First of all, Greens are very strong in Western and Northern Europe, that's true, but these are also the countries where Greens already exist for 30, 40 years. So for sure, you cannot expect that the party that exists for 5 years and party that exists for 40 years are going to compete for the same results. So in that sense, I think that part of the success of the Greens in Western Europe and Northern Europe comes from the fact that, Greens are very well established, that citizens know what the Greens have to offer, that they already built their credibility on the local level, on regional elections, and then they become trusted partner for citizens for the national elections as well. In some countries, of course, the Greens are still not part of the electoral offer, sometimes because they are just party that is inventing or reinventing itself, sometimes because, as I said, the agenda just doesn't allow discussion on the, there's not even opportunity to prove that you have a good solution and a good offer. Sometimes it's also a matter of kind of a political offer, in a sense. But as I said before, to me, it seems that there is very little choice in the, with the years to come, that we will have to talk about the climate crisis, we will have to talk about gender equality, we will have to talk about inclusive societies, we'll have to talk about social justice, and I'm confident that Greens will grow even more because they do have ideology, they do have policies, they do have strategies on these issues.
And in Serbia, are Greens popular or not?
Well, I mean, it depends also what you consider Greens, and it depends what you consider popular. At the moment, we have one coalition that entered at the last elections to the parliament. We have had previously a couple of smaller green parties, mainly focused only on ecology, that had 1 or 2 parliamentarians. But these parties did not... I mean, they had a lot of different issues, but I think that the main issue is that you cannot fight for ecological issues any longer on a legislative level, simply because there's, law and ecology doesn't exist anymore. Now we are talking about environmental laws, because that means more than ecology. It means understanding economy in environmental context. It means understanding education in environmental context. It means understanding health system in environmental context. It means understanding trade, foreign affairs in environmental context. So in that sense, if you are a one-issue party only taking care of ecology, there is not much impact that you can do. But as I said on the previous elections, we had this new coalition with 3 different or more different actors which entered the parliament with a bit more about 5%. And they are doing already a good impact, even though, Serbia is not the most democratic country ever. But you can see what it means to have green opposition in parliament already.
And why do you think that Greens are getting more popular in Europe? Because people understand climate crisis, because they understand that environmental problems are very important for the society?
I think they do, but I think that the reason why they do understand and care more is because now they're feeling very concrete consequences. So it's not very abstract anymore. Like you can clearly see that there are droughts throughout the year. You can clearly see that the temperatures have risen up to the incredible levels. You can already see that the rivers are dry during summer. So these kind of practical consequences are already there. We can see them. And then it's much easier for people to understand than if we talk about very abstract terms. On the other hand, I think that like more and more people understand the complexity of the green approach. So they understand, what healthy food has to do with the climate change and what climate change has to do with education and what gender policies have to do with foreign affairs. Like these connections between the sectors are becoming also more and more obvious and more understandable to the people. And these are the two basic principles of the Greens, I would say, like this holistic approach where our solutions need to be complex simply because our lives are complex. On one end, and then on the other end, the climate emergency treatment of the nature in a different way.
I have another one question. Which are the most important topics of green agenda? Maybe you can tell us.
Yeah, I would like to believe in a world where there's no such thing as a green topic, but only like green perspectives and green solutions to every other topic. Okay. But there is
we can talk about green solutions, for example. Yeah.
No, I think we need to talk about green topics per se. I think that we really need to have a conversation, and we need to find the different models and different systems on the way how we treat nature. And this goes to many different directions. It goes to the question of resources. It goes to the question of how our economies are organized. It goes to the question of how our trade is organized, how our energy policies are organized, and so on and so on. I think we very urgently need to have a conversation on biodiversity, because the reports that we are getting from the experts institutions around the world are not very promising, let's say, if not to use any more alarmist language. But for many different things, we are now passing very quickly to the point of no return. And then these conversations really need to happen. But on the other hand, I think that kind of the social and democratic issue are also very crucial. And then when it comes to democracy, the understanding of rule of law, it's becoming a very green thing now, with seeing what's happening in Europe, and especially in the European Union, and now with Poland, with Hungary, with Slovenia. It's kind of clear that if we don't agree on the social contract, which says that rule of law is important and it's the way how we are guiding and managing our societies, then we are opening our doors to a lot of misuses, even from the institutional and presidential or ministerial levels. And then on the social level, I think that kind of this idea of leaving no one behind also needs to be illustrated, because it's and further developed, because it's not only about not leaving anyone behind in a sense of doing a humanitarian work or doing kind of pity the lowest ranks, but rather about enriching our society with equality.
And how do you think the war in Ukraine influenced a lot on environmental green agenda in Europe or not? All these talks about energy crisis and green solutions, they're right now in question.
I wish it had well, I wish there was no war to start with, but I wish that we had more time and different conversations that we have, because war in Ukraine was also used to shut down a lot of processes, and it was used to speed up a lot of processes, and shutting down the conversation and speeding up the things usually is not it's not resulting in a very good things. Now we are all speaking about energy efficiency, but we are now speaking about energy efficiency for a wrong reason. and like kind of speaking about energy efficiency in a sense that we need to now say, we all need to freeze in order to take Putin down. I mean, that's a nice slogan, but that's not the context that the Greens are advocating for. Also, energy transition now is very important. We'll take what we get. So like we are going to discuss energy transition now, but because of this kind of idea of we have to do it quickly this winter, now you have to reopening a lot of ideas on, let's have nuclear, let's now burn everything we have to burn. Let's now make deals with Saudi Arabia because they're not Russia, but I mean, Saudi Arabia is still Saudi Arabia. So in that sense, yes, we got the opportunity to have some conversations, but I'm just not sure that the urge for solution in the next month is going to take us to any more sustainable agenda.
So for me, it looks like right now climate activists are getting more visible because they make these actions which bring people attention to climate change. And do they cooperate with Greens in Europe, or it's separate movements?
I mean, I would start from saying that it's a separate movement. Also because I think that everyone has its role to play. And I haven't seen, or rather I have seen a very nice cooperation between climate movements and green parties so far. And of course that, institutional politicians and protesters on the street, I mean, they're not the same side of the coin. So in that sense, it's good that they cover different aspects and that they have their own perspectives. And as much as they're able to cooperate, it's better it's going to be. So in that sense, climate mobilizations have been crucial for many of the elections where people understood the problem, understood the urgency, and as a result voted Greens in some places much more than probably usually they would. But we cannot speak about appropriation, like all these people in the street, they're not Greens. And hopefully, a lot of these people who are today on the streets, especially the young people, they will understand that, politics is a matter of choice. And the more you are involved, the more you're going to get, of course. And that if you want to get green, you need to vote green. Now, what is the green offer? That's a different question here. But by voting people who are, don't want to talk about green solutions or green problems, who don't want to talk about climate change, you're not going to get the government that deals with it. So to kind of ignore that fact, that's not useful. So in that sense, yes, two different movements, but working for the same cause. And I think that's needed because this agenda is so big that it has to be covered from different angles.
Can we talk about the dream of green parties and how can you imagine it?
Oh, of course. Well, I have a dream. The vision of the Green parties is well known, and Greens are a very coherent political family in that sense. It's very probable that if you meet person from a Green Party of New Zealand or a Green Party in Brazil or a Green Party in Uganda or a Green Party in Switzerland, that on a dream level and on a vision level, they're going to give you a pretty same story. Yeah? I think that the Green dream is kind of revolved around our values, and our values are very indicative. I mean, like the environmental justice and, fixed climate change. We call it a dream for now, but one day it might be a strategy. Only it's about living in peace with the nature and living in a mutually useful relationship with the nature, which at the moment is not the case. It involves the social justice, which doesn't mean that everyone are equal. Like it just means that opportunities are there for everyone, and it means that we are making a society which treats people and recognizes people and their diversity, and where system is not framing you, but you are contributing to framing of the system. And then we are also speaking of, obviously, about the peace and non-violence, because in a world where there is a conflict, and especially where is the armed conflict, we cannot kind of speak about, social justice, equality, and so on, obviously. And then the kind of fourth pillar of our green vision, next to environmental justice and social justice and a peace and non-violence, also goes a lot to, well, I would also like to kind of stress there the gender equality. It is part of the social justice in general, but it deserves a bit bigger place because understanding humans and their genders is something that is very complex at the moment. And while we are still in a world which cannot bear with the fact that women should be equal to men, we also now are recognizing that the humans are just so much more than women and men division. And I think that once we understand that complexity, it will not be about specific categories that much, but it will be about understanding that it's about humans and who they are and who they want to be, and not about the categories that we are giving them. And this also relates to the final maybe value in the dream, which is connected to democracy, which, as someone smart in history said, is not the most perfect system, but is the best system we invented so far. And it's a dream of a countries or communities that are organized based on subsidiarity, based on equality and inclusion, based on participation, and based on prosperity.
Is it possible to get this?
Well, piece by piece, sure. Piece by piece. I mean, we can.
Probably, the first step. Not first, but the next step.
Well, it depends for whom and for where, of course. I think that, a lot of these things we can also practice. Mm-hmm. Probably for our lifetime. I mean, I like to call myself a young person, but I mean, there's a lot of younger activists out there. And probably for our lifetimes, we're not going to see all of that implemented and functioning and, being perfect and probably even elevating on the next stage. But I think a lot of it we can already practice, you can practice it in your daily life. You can practice it with your family. We can practice it with your community. You can practice it with your kind of local authorities. And then essentially you can also kind of do it on a national level, in a way. So I think that there are already some countries which are doing a very good job in certain areas. There are some local authorities that are doing a great job in kind of preparing their communities for, future-proof state of play. And then there are some institutions, some organizations, even some companies that are really, doing what they're preaching on a level basis. So in that sense, I don't think it's good to be discouraged by complexity of it, but rather be inspired by so many opportunities to practice your values and to, realize your dream on a micro level.
You said about inspiration, and what inspires you?
I am inspired by lots of things, but maybe two things to mention here. I'm inspired by collective action. Mm-hmm. I really I almost cry every time I see people kind of having this unspoken coordination, so climate movements were really inspiring because it's not that we have to train each and every person for 4 years in order to, be there and do that. But kind of a lot of people knew what they need to do, really a silent coordination, something is in the air and then we managed to grasp it and we knew what we need to do. And this inspires me because it's kind of, it shows you that, we can still live in a world where we care about the others and are able to be there and support each other for the common thing, even though we don't necessarily need to speak about it in the exact words, but we share this dream together. And then I also get really inspired by people who are stepping out of their comfort zone for issues that are not necessarily only for themselves. We recently met with LGBT activists in Azerbaijan, and it's really not possible not to be inspired by these people who know in advance that consequences are going to be big, but they still find power and strength to do things, in the topic where they know that their physical, their mental health, their social relations are going to be severed and endangered after these actions. And they still do it, Or with women's rights activist groups in Georgia, or even the Irish referendum a couple of years ago. So yeah, these kind of stories where you can see that, it takes one brave individual to create a group, and it takes a group to create a law essentially. And it all goes back to someone waking up and saying, you know what, let's do this.
You know the situation in Belarus. Do you have any words probably for people? Because you know that many eco-activists and people who support the green agenda and green policies, they just right now, for political reasons, they left the country. Some of them stay there, but they can't do any collective actions right now. And probably you have any words for them?
Look, I mean, I always think that also looking in some examples in Serbia, I mean, they and as a day, like enemies or, you know, the competition or whatever, they can break a lot of things. They cannot break your dreams, and they cannot break your kindness. And I'm a bit kind of in a mood of radical love, you know, like just kill them with kindness and show radical love to everyone. And just because I think that that's, you know, we are going to endure because we are running on a positive motion and a positive emotion, and that can keep you driving. And I know this all sounds a bit abstract, but like I think what really matters there is to keep on being inspired, and then whatever works for you, you know. And if it works for you to take a rest, like 5 years of non-action, 5 years of non-action. If that means that, you know, you will endure for the next 20. If it means living in a different country for a while, I mean, it's hard, but it's all okay. I think that one thing to kind of maybe say is just don't go against each other. Like don't judge each other on personal choices, because in this hard moment, people make choices based on many different and complex situations and responding to many different sensitivizations from the outside. And we don't always have time to justify, agree, you know, and collectively agree that this is the way to go. So those actions stand very personal, but just respect each other's choices on that level, knowing that we need each and every soldier when we come back.
When you speak about soldier, you speak about environmental front.
Absolutely. Exclusively.
And can people from Belarus also be involved in this environmental front in Europe? And how can they do it right now? For example, they left the country. They live in Poland, Lithuania, Georgia, and whatever. So, but they want to continue the environmental activism. So, can they find any way to cooperate with other activists? Maybe they have any mechanisms they can use and Greens can give.
Maybe a bit cynical comment, but I think that like majority of the great books was written in exile. No.
Yes.
So
everybody should start to
maybe
write
it's time. Well, I mean, it's also true. We don't have a lot of, you know, literature on green activism and greens issues. So, I mean, for at least some, I'm sure that this is the way. But I think like there's a lot of opportunities. I mean, apart from obviously, you know, being able to join something on a local level, which I think is beneficial not only for people to kind of keep, you know, the healthy state of mind of being active and doing something, but also it's beneficial for the local community to be exposed to a different perspective, different angle, you know. And I mean, everyone appreciates extra pair of hands as a help, of course, but then extra pair of brain cells also help to get a bit different perspectives and advance on the local activism. So that's one thing. I think providing support to each other is also a very important thing, where kind of keeping in touch, keeping the record, supporting people in their endeavors is a huge social investment. Also for one day, when we need to know what resources we have out there in Europe for Belarus. And then on a European level per se, there are of course several different organizations and several different instances that you can follow and engage on an individual level. Also as kind of organization, you know, of Belarusians abroad, there's a lot of impact that you can have. And I mean, people are interested in Europe, people are interested in what's going on in Europe. I know it's not your question, but I think kind of it's worth mentioning that Belarus has for a very long time been a very complex situation. It's very hard to understand it. If you are not dealing with it particularly, you cannot just drop someone, in Belarus, no, because, it takes a lot of time to understand. But interest is there. And I think that just kind of explaining it further and helping people understand that Belarus is not Lukashenko. Belarus is not Putin. Belarus is not Lithuanian kingdom. Like, there's people behind the word Belarus, and then explaining this and kind of making sure to understand and keeping connections alive between different Europeans and Belarusian people. I think that's the biggest contribution you can make at the moment.
And one personal question. You left Serbia and you live in Belgium right now. What was it easy to move to Brussels for you?
Well, let's say yes. I moved to Belgium to work for the European Green Party on invitation, and I just continued my mission there. So I never felt like I'm losing something, only gaining, because it was the kind of organic next step on my way compared to the job I had before. So in that sense, the continuation was there. Also, in the Young Greens, we've been very close to each other on a European level. I have been seeing people from Sweden, Spain, and Belarus more than I've been seeing some of my friends from primary school. So, in that sense, that feeling of European community, like Europe is our village. Like I am coming from Serbia, but Europe is my village. That feeling is a very precious feeling. And then when you're on a national level, that feeling gets very much contrasted with the national reality, especially if you will live in a nationalistic country. But moving to Brussels was kind of flourishing in this segment. You move, and 30% or around 30% of people living in Brussels are from Europe, from different countries. So this is my reality now. Like it's a kind of Europe in small, like a Smurf village of Europe. It is like a family. And as I said, like with the Young Greens, if you are active in the Young Greens and if you're active in international level, you will meet these people at least twice a year or sometimes even more. Also, that works for the people from the parties. Not everyone, of course, but people who are taking care of the international work. And just think, whom are you seeing 2, 3, 4 times a year regularly? Yeah? And then you follow each other, you support each other, and, we share the same dream. So we are a family in that sense. And it's possible to find the comfort there, and it's possible to find the support. And that's what family is about.
So we talked with you before COP27. Do you think it's something important or not, these meetings in Egypt?
I think we should not fall into the trap and become cynical towards the international meetings. They are very important, but the international meeting does not exist in a vacuum. International meeting is who gets to be delegated to this meeting. So if we have people who are devoted to the climate action, then international meetings are going to be great. They're going to be revolution, boom, 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 climate action. But if you are sending to those international meetings governmental officials who are skeptical, who are going there for fun or not even knowing why they are going there, or they are going there to block the process, then international meetings don't matter. So international meetings per se as methodology, I think we should not fall into the trap of kind of calling them efficient or non-efficient, because it's really about the people being there. And I think that the fight from our end should not be about judging COP being efficient, non-efficient, media or stunt or whatever, but rather ensuring that whom the government nominates to get there and the people who are in the government dealing with the climate policy are actually pro-climate experts, managers, or whatever they need, politicians, whatever they need to be there. So for COP27, it's also the matter of the agenda, because now, as far as I understand, COPs are now the technical meeting about the implementation, because we already agreed on a big vision and a big scope and a big strategic document like Paris Agreement was. And until everyone accepts it, we can't move forward. We cannot have new vision if the old vision still didn't went into every house. So in that sense, I would say that COPs needs to keep on happening, because we need to keep on developing these implementation agreements. But maybe from the international side or the activist side, we should not necessarily focus all our efforts at pressure at COP. but rather kind of focus them where the real problem is, which is a national government.
And probably my last question will be also about inspiration. So, because I think that ecoactivists, mostly from Belarus, they right now need some energy. Maybe you can tell about any book, music, place, or something like that can bring people energy so they can find it and continue their work, because I think it's important right now.
Well, there's several things. I would, first of all, like to tell everyone to maybe check the story about the Irish referendum and Repeal the 8. Yeah. This is maybe not for eco-activists per se. I mean, it was about the abortion rights, but I find that story so inspiring because it went through the society lines. It shows how, like silent, small actions day by day can move mountains. And it showed how different society groups worked for the same issue and how people were able to compromise with their own beliefs because they understood that for majority of society, something else is needed. And I would also there's a lot of books that I'm sure you will enjoy reading. One of the last ones I have read was called, remind me, what was the Darwin evaluation of species? Or discovery of the species. Well, this was called Rediscovery of the Species. And it was a book about different methodologies for reviving species that are extinct. You can think a lot about it, but to me what kind of came out of there is a very important understanding that technology will not save us. We cannot just keep on killing species because there's a machine that can reinvent them 100 years after. There are nice and interesting stories of how coming to different conclusions. And then one that I would really like to recommend is by Roman Krznaric. It's called The Good Ancestors. And it's a story about the time. And it's a story about how long-term thinking and short-term thinking lives before today and how they worked before. And to me, it really helped me make peace with the fact that, I'm probably going to be activist for 50 years and I'm going to see just like a tiny atom of change. But, on a bigger scale of time, society is still better tomorrow than it was yesterday, And this book was really impactful in that sense.
Can you name it one more time?
Yes, it's called The Good Ancestors from Roman Krznaric.
Super. Thank you very much.
Pleasure all mine.
Thank you.
Зялёныя размовы. Падкаст «Вандроўка» па экалагічным актывізме.